So we are streaming live. There's a little bit of a lag time. And I'm going to hit record, and then we're going to start the webinar.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first session of our National Science Foundation funded AEESP, Association of Environmental Engineering and Science Professors, Converging COVID-19 virtual conference series on environment, health, and equity. My name is Colleen Naughton. I'm an assistant professor in civil and environmental engineering at the University of California, Merced, and a co-PI on this grant with Dr. Maya Traps. We have an outstanding panel for you today for our first session on systemic biases in environmental engineering education. A disclaimer that this webinar will be recorded and it is live streamed on YouTube. So by continuing to view this webinar, you are consenting to be recorded. Some Zoom housekeeping instructions on the upper right hand of your screen. If you're not seeing the interpreter, we have a sign language interpreter. You can go to side-by-side gallery view. On the bottom of your screen, you should see a question and answer. That's where you can submit questions and answers, or to the hashtag AEESP Converging COVID-19. There's also closed captioning. You can enable that. And there's also a website that'll open up in a separate browser with the closed captions for the conference. We'd like to share a short video with you before we start about the goals of the conference.
The Association of Environmental Engineering and Science Professors, AEESP, is made up of professors in academic programs throughout the world who provide education in the sciences and technologies of environmental protection.
As hard as we work in our domain expertise, we need to work equally as hard to build positive human relationships with our colleagues, our students, and the communities that we serve.
We will continue to work towards a more just, equitable, and healthy society.
The goal of the virtual conference, Converging COVID-19 Environment, Health, and Equity, is to bring together different disciplines of environmental engineering and science to discuss actions to form a more healthy, just, and equitable society.
The conference themes align with the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine's grand challenges and opportunities for environmental engineering in the 21st century.
COVID-19, systemic biases, and environmental engineering in education.
COVID-19 and fostering informed decisions and actions. COVID-19 and the creation of efficient, healthy, and resilient cities. COVID-19 and sustainably supplying food, water, and energy. COVID-19 and designing a future without pollution and waste.
COVID-19 and climate change mitigation and adaptation.
Each session, as much as possible, will look at the convergence of air,
Water,
wastewater,
Food,
People, the built environment,
waste, fostered by the COVID-19 pandemic, and the unfolding realities of the need to address inequities in our communities.
Faculty from the University of South Florida and the University of California, Merced, are pleased to hold this virtual conference with support from AEESP and the National Science Foundation's CBET program.
So thank you, Dr. Maya Traps, for video editing that video.
the Association.
Apologies, I'll get the screen share back up. Okay, so it is my honor to introduce the moderator of our session today, Dr. Kimberly Jones. She is a professor and chair of civil and environmental engineering at Howard University and also an associate dean of research and graduate education at the College of Engineering and Architecture. Her research focuses on improving water and environmental quality She's served on many different panels with the National Academies of Science, EPA, and she also served on the Environmental Engineering Grand Challenges Committee of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, for which this conference is based. So please join me in welcoming our moderator, Dr. Kimberly Jones.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, technically 6 minutes ago for us on the East Coast. Good morning to those on the West Coast. It's a pleasure to moderate this session. I want to thank the conference organizers for inviting me to be moderator. I'm really excited about the topic because I do believe that those of us in our profession have kind of an inherent responsibility because of the kind of work we do to be at the forefront as we deal with issues around COVID-19, systemic racism, and environmental engineering education. So I wanted to start today by just with some basic definitions. First, systemic racism. Sometimes it's referred to as institutional racism, and it really refers to the systems in place that perpetuate racial injustice. So these systems may look different depending on what year you're born in or what year we're in or exactly where you're located geographically. But in this country, those systems are pervasive, right? And so they affect everything from what neighborhood you live in, where you're educated, where your children are educated, how you're perceived by society, your access and quality of the healthcare you receive, your likelihood of being harassed or killed by police, your access to voting, all those things, or all those institutions. We've learned, and the COVID-19 pandemic has really highlighted a lot of the inequities in a lot of those systems. And so the idea of systemic racism it's new to some folks, it's offensive to others, but for many of us, particularly those who live in brown skin every day like I do, it is an everyday reality. And COVID-19 exposed a lot of these systemic inequities, and it really has forced us to think about how a truly colorblind virus somehow managed to affect different communities in very disproportionate ways. And so I want to jump to environmental engineering and education because that's what we do. That's something that we, many of us as professors or students in environmental engineering, we have for many years viewed the main purpose of our work to really safeguard public health. We deal with water, wastewater treatment and air pollution. And a lot of our work is really focused around a lot of the technical issues related to a lot of those things. And we are truly the caretakers of public health, global public health. And we provide scientific underpinnings for many of the enforceable environmental regulations that protect and preserve our water, land, and air resources. And we also educate the next generation of scientists and engineers who will continue the tradition and do the same. And then when COVID-19 came, it really turned a lot of these institutions upside down, right? In a way, we are teaching our students online learning. A lot of those things really changed. And then the Grand Challenges report that Maya mentioned earlier is entitled Environmental Engineering in the 21st Century, addressing the grand challenges. I think Colleen mentioned what our main grand challenges were. We had an ultimate challenge, right? We had the 5 grand challenges, but then we defined as the ultimate challenge, preparing the field to address a new future. And that's where our community, AEESP, is really important to make sure that we're able to realize that challenge and we're able to really prepare our future environmental engineers and scientists to address a new future that is not changing on the scale of decades. We're seeing now that we're really changing on the scale of months these days. You know, it's not even 2 or 3 years. We were asked to do this report looking forward in the next 30 years, but we've seen such huge changes just in the last 6 to 8 months that we're finding we're having to really adapt on a much faster time scale. So I really want to challenge everyone as we get into the meat of today's conference to really think critically about how we can encourage collaboration, interdisciplinary work and research, and community level engagement in all of our work, and how we can inspire our students to do the same thing. COVID has really furthered this challenge. When we did the report a couple of years ago, we never envisioned that we'd be in a pandemic 2 years later. So this really, it does highlight the importance of a lot of the themes of that work. And today's session you'll hear a lot of folks talk about, a lot of our own members of our own community talk about how the COVID-19 pandemic has already transformed the way that they teach their classes, the way that they think about their research, the way that we gather as a community. So I want to thank all of you for attending the session today. We really appreciate you being here. I hope that you've submitted lots of questions and you continue to submit questions as we go along with our panel today. So with that, I want to thank you and introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Alicia Ferguson. She is an associate professor at North Carolina A&T, and she will talk to us about student resiliency and adaptation during the pandemic, and some of the findings that her team has learned across institutions, across students, faculty, and administrators in all STEM fields. So let's welcome Dr. Ferguson.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. Today I want to touch on the subject of student resiliency in STEM fields during COVID-19 pandemic. There's a larger effort behind what I'm presenting here, supported by NSF Rapid Grant, to overall look at decision-making processes by students in STEM fields. Resiliency is the ability of a person's society, population, or even the environment to recover or rebound from a significant or even a small perturbation. Here we are interested in how STEM students are able to recover and even in some cases thrive in their academics following what can be considered a drastic change in how teaching and learning is being delivered and comprehended. Due to the need to social distance and protect health, we experienced a sizable shift to online, asynchronous, synchronous, and also hybrid forms of in-person educational delivery, causing students to adjust to what we call a new normal way of learning. Slide 2. Resiliency is often affected by predisposing, enabling, and reinforcing factors that all affect learning. And there are many theoretical frameworks and contexts to understand resiliency. This context may be new, and we wanted to start with communicating with various parties involved in teaching and learning through this pandemic. We interviewed here 18 administrators, 63 students, and 32 faculty members across 6 institutions we thought had varied profiles, like student demographics, including race, and focused in the interviews on questions surrounding their experience and perceptions related to student functioning, behavior, and performance. Slide 3. We went through a process to transcribe and theme those interviews that I just mentioned. Here we present some main pointed and noteworthy findings due to time, and here are some student views. So out of necessity, many STEM labs were streamlined, shortened, or stopped completely, and the students reported that as a consequence, their participation and understanding was reduced. Faculty struggled, in their opinion, to give the same experience in the online environment. Professors were, as a second note, unable to meet with students in person and one-on-one. Although some online meetings were facilitated, students really felt that their academic progression was affected. In a similar way, they really miss that peer interaction and support, where this is critical in motivating students to perform based on shared experiences. Thirdly, additionally, and really ironically, some of the students admitted that faculty leniency and even pass-fail options, although appreciated, and in some cases, it was needed, it worked to reduce their motivation and even enthusiasm for learning. Slide 4. For faculty, these thematic areas routinely surface. Faculty noticed difficulties in students being able to cope and even in performing the work, particularly right as universities shifted largely to the online format. So that that March-April period. But thankfully, faculty found that there were some positive adjustments and recovery for many students as time progressed. Universities asked faculty to be lenient, and what we found across universities was inconsistencies and lack of clarity on what lenient really meant, and how to establish that fairly and even strategically. Understanding how this affected a student's decision-making and resiliency in short and long run will be challenging for us. Slide 5. From the administrators' perspectives, they had a number of conflicting responsibilities to consider. How is the university to ensure overall functioning? And how are we to respond not only to student learning and achievement, kind of the ultimate university goal, but also faculty response and functioning when faculty are a critical part of that student experience. Administrators had to, and when I mean administrators, deans, chairs, they had to make decisions on pass, fail, and withdrawal options. And along with that, the impact on student learning outcomes and transitioning to higher level courses, graduate school, and even to the workforce for those senior students. In particular, hands-on labs, field experiences, and learning through doing are critical aspects of STEM learning. Administrators also found both a lack of motivation and ironically increased motivation in achieving learning goals, because either some families and students had increased challenges in their lives, while some actually had decreased distraction in moving back to a more ideal home environment. Again, this is likely where the impact of COVID was not the same for all the students and all communities. We refer back to the term resiliency. These predisposing factors that affect coping, recovery, and rebound come into play. Your resources, internet access, savings, a large home for private spaces to learn, and even the university that you attend with its given resources are all influential for resiliency. Universities also learn really quickly about their level of technology savviness for both students and faculty, for either stemming online cheating, for facilitating labs online as examples. And in some cases, universities really try to increase that knowledge base rapidly through trainings and purchase of equipment. Slide 6, our last slide. But what can we do as university educators to really support student resiliency in the STEM fields during events like COVID-19 that really changed specifically how STEM content was delivered or is delivered? These are some of the main thoughts from all groups, student, faculty, and administrators. 1, we need to give students and faculty the needed resources, computers, cameras, internet connection. We need to be proactive about creating and delivering innovative lab content online. We need to collaborate and share ideas across universities and educators. We need to find innovative ways to have students intern with companies and even other universities online to continue and reinforce STEM learning. And to do all of this, we need to plan for emergency funding and create proactive programs for training and development. There are other strategies not mentioned on this slide, mental health counseling, safe study spaces, and so forth that are equally critical, especially given the COVID impacts. So to close, I want to say that we have a second phase of interviews in early spring. COVID impacts are continuing. And we really hope to add to our content and delivery, both qualitative data, quantitative data, looking at the differences across universities and different groups, and even build on our theoretical framework. I want to thank all the investigators on this project and our student researchers that work through this pandemic with resiliency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alicia, Dr. Ferguson. Next, we have Dr. Susan Mastin. She's a professor at Michigan State University, and she will talk a little bit more. Actually, Dr. Ferguson gave a great segue. She will talk to us about specifically some of the experiences she has had in impacting her education students, particularly in teaching labs. Dr. Mastin.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and to present to you. What I'm going to talk today is a little bit of background information about how the socioeconomic and inequity issues have impacted students and how we've tried to address that at Michigan State University. So research has shown that COVID-19, Research has shown that COVID-19 has disproportionately affected racial and ethnic minority groups with high rates of death in African American, Native American, Latinx communities as compared to that in white communities. This is thought to be due to a variety of reasons, including chronic medical conditions, poor access to healthcare, along with living and working conditions that predispose them to worse outcomes. For example, the wealth of white households is 10 times that of Black households. 30% of whites have had the privilege of working from home during the pandemic. On the contrary, only 20% of Blacks have had the same privilege. Next. COVID-19 has disproportionately affected first-generation college students as compared to students with college-educated parents. As shown here, minority seniors were much more likely to have changed or canceled their plans to attend college compared to white students. Internet connectivity, as mentioned by Alicia, is poor among many of these students and is poor for first-generation, minority, and rural students as compared to others. Next. Next. As many of us are aware, international students have been greatly affected by COVID-19. Travel restrictions have prevented many from returning or arriving in the US. Their mental health may be affected by their concerns for their family's health and well-being in their home country. Visa requirements or delays have meant that many are forced to remain at home, and this results in a sense of isolation from their peers. They struggle with having to overcome time differences, challenges to poor internet, and as mentioned, the sense of isolation, which is affecting many of our students. Next. A year and a half ago, which sometimes right now feels like ages ago, I agreed to revamp our environmental engineering lab class to meet the new ABET student outcomes and the revised environmental engineering program criteria. When I did so, I had no clue that I would be attempting to do this during a pandemic. The goal of the revised course was to provide students with hands-on activities that would allow them to design and conduct experiments and to analyze the data generated to make sound engineering judgment and recommendations. As the decision was made to move almost all fall semester courses online, the activities needed to be independent of location and could be conducted remotely. My goal was to allow the students to use inexpensive, readily available kits to conduct their experiments. And thus, over the summer, I developed 6 labs and 4 assignments that would accomplish these goals. The labs, while I think have been generally successful, do have challenges. While I lecture synchronously, the students are allowed to do their labs asynchronously. This results in a significant disconnect and a lot of email traffic. The students are in teams and they need to compile data, but time differences and the inability to meet in person has resulted in challenges for many of our students. Next. In this lab course, and also in my water and wastewater engineering class, which I'm also teaching this semester, I've used a number of management techniques to try and overcome many of the challenges that I've mentioned and Alicia also mentioned. For example, I found that I needed to be flexible with assignment due dates and office hours. I've got students all over the world, some of whom are on a 12-hour difference. So what works for me doesn't necessarily work for them. I record my lectures and I post them on YouTube, which they can later view. That means that they don't have to access the course management system to view. And as one student noted, that he liked having them on YouTube because he felt like he was just watching YouTube videos rather than doing work all the time. I never expected that one, but it was interesting. I don't require their video cameras to be on. Many are living at home. They're living with multiple family members. So for their own privacy, I think it's important not to require video cameras on. And in both of my courses, I've chosen textbooks that are available through the university library system, so the students didn't have the added expense of textbooks. I've used teamwork. It helps in terms of building a sense of community, but there are challenges, especially for those that are overseas, those with poor internet connections. But at the same time, as I mentioned, it does provide students opportunities to socialize. I found that students tend to struggle with time management and remembering deadlines. So I send out weekly messages along with reminders at the start and end of each lecture to help ensure that students have the information they need regarding due dates, assignments, upcoming lectures to help them be successful.
Susan,
I've also used a class blog for more informal communication, and then I've used participation questions to focus on their mental health and well-being. And lastly, I think it's really important, and Alicia mentioned this, we need to maintain active collaboration amongst all of us, and so that we don't have that same sense of isolation too, and can move forward successfully with educating the next generation of students. Next. So just thank you. Photos here are actually my students this week who have been out in the field sampling to measure nitrogen and phosphorus in various different waterways. And it's been actually exciting to see them accomplish this. Thank you. And sorry for going over.
It's okay. Thank you, Susan. That was great. Thanks for sharing a lot of your experiences that from this semester and giving some great tips. Next up is Daniel Jamar. He's a professor at Washington University in St. Louis. He's also the chair of the 2021 conference, AEESP Conference. So hopefully everyone is preparing for that. He will be highlighting some of the really how the conference will be using convergence as an overarching theme in what they do. So Dan.
Great, thank you very much, Kimberly. It's a great opportunity to get to tell you what we have planned for the conference for next summer and how we're going to try to put convergence into this. I'd like to start out by thanking the co-hosting institutions on this: Missouri University of Science and Technology, University of Missouri, and Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville. And so yes, the question, how does a large conference address convergence? I'll go through a couple ways I think we're doing that. One thing I'll just say at the very outset, we're all thinking, what is July 2021 going to look like? Our plan for this conference is to do an in-person conference. We're hopeful that we can do that next July. If we can't do an in-person conference next July, then we will do an in-person conference later when it's possible to do that, ideally in 2022, with maybe some smaller virtual events for July 2021. But as those of you who have been to the conference, the real benefit there are these interactions that we have with people. And the other thing is, I view this as a play date. We want you to come over to our house to play in July 2021 so we can talk and continue this conversation. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? First thing is assemble a strong and diverse team. And so, as I said, we have 4 universities that are putting this together. We have a strong organizing committee with representation from all of these participating groups. The other thing that we've done from the very outset of planning the conference is have a student committee, and we have a student chair, and that person's already been looking out for what are the types of things we want to have on the program that will be of interest to students. And so that's all I want to say here. Next slide. So the whole conference theme and structure are based on convergence. So we call it environmental engineering science and engineering and science at the confluence. And so as we've looked at this, we have 4 convergence areas. I'll say more about that in just a minute. And then 5 grand challenges. So we're going to use both the convergence areas and the grand challenges to help organize the overall program of talks, plenary presentations, and workshops. Next slide. So if we look at our convergence areas, we have 4 of them: education and research. One of the things that's so special about the AEESP conference is it is the education and research conference. It is both of them. And really, as environmental engineering professors, that's what we do, and that's what unites us as an overall community. So I'm really excited that Yvette Pearson from Rice University, the creator of the Engineering Change podcast, will be our opening keynote. Then there's research and action. A lot of us in our community are wanting to know, how can we have an impact? And that's so important right now in the middle of a pandemic. So we have Gary White of water.org and Amy Pruden, who many of you know at Virginia Tech, will be speaking to that. And then we have 2 other research entrepreneurship practice and research in air, water, and soil as other convergence areas. So the research, air, water, and soil, again, environmental engineers, we go to our water meetings, we go to our air meetings or solid waste meetings, but the AEESP conference is the one place where all of us come together. So we're really excited about that. Next slide. We'll have convergence and workshops. This is interesting. Okay, great. And so there are a couple of things that we're going to be looking at here. Workshop proposals are due in just a few hours. But one that we're really excited about is environmental engineering and environmental health science. So we have a proposal into National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences to help support this part of the program. Whenever I write a grant, we always say, okay, whatever is happening is important to human health, and we're concerned about that. But I'm not actually interacting with environmental health science researchers the way that I would want to. And so we're going to have at least 3 workshops focused on that. How do we interact with NIEHS, the microbiome and environmental engineering, and aerosols, air quality, and human health are 3 that we think we're going to definitely have there. Next slide. So how do we promote diversity and access? So we want to invite people from the broader community. We're going to be seeking sponsorship. So one of the big things for this is that we would like to make this an accessible conference, both financially, location-wise, and the way that we're organizing it. So we're reaching out to NSF and NIEHS, as well as corporate sponsorship. And a big thing we want to do with that corporate sponsorship is to provide travel grants. We want this to be a conference that money isn't the reason you don't attend. We want people to be able to apply so that we get the broadest group at this meeting that we possibly can. And then starting in 2017, this meeting was held on a Tuesday through Thursday. So anybody who's trying to, and as we all are right now, many of us are, balance family demands with work demands, having this during normal work week is really important. So Michigan started that in 2017. We'll be continuing that. And through our conference website, we'll have easy links to family care providers. And summer in St. Louis is a great time. So if you have family who'd like to come with you to the meeting, you can attend the conference and they can do some really great things here as well. Next slide. So to finish up here, I won't sing Meet Me in St. Louis. I might do that when we actually have the conference, but I hope that you will all meet me in St. Louis next July. And of course, if we can't do it here next July, we will do it when it's possible, possibly summer 2022. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dan. And I think we're all hoping that we can have that play date in St. Louis summer 2021. Our next speaker is Maya Trotz. Maya is a professor at the University of South Florida, and she will be talking to us about issues of inequity and specifically how they've been presented during COVID-19. She'll talk a little bit about her Envision Sustainable Communities course and how to interface with student learning. So without further ado, Dr. Trotz.
Thank you, Kim, and good afternoon, everyone. 3 crises are on my mind today: COVID-19, criminal justice, and climate change. And what I'd like to do today is share some experiences that I've had with a Strong Coast, which is a graduate traineeship program that brings together environmental engineers, anthropologists, and marine scientists to work with communities on food, energy, and water solutions. In particular, I draw from the work of Dr. Maya Carrasquillo, a recent graduate from the program, and a required course that I teach that Kim just mentioned. I will try to link COVID-19, criminal justice, and climate change to the discussions on systemic biases in environmental engineering education. Next slide. Today, 1,104,408 people have died from COVID-19. In the US, that number is 222,831. Many of us have lost loved ones, including direct family members of our Strong Coast program. Thanks to the work of Dr. Kendi at BU's Center for Anti-Racist Research and The Atlantic, the COVIDtracking.com website provides COVID-19 data by race. In the US, Black people die for every 100,000 Black persons, 100 Black people die. The number for white persons is 44. So that's a 2.3 times difference. Amidst the trauma, can we go to the next slide? Amidst the trauma of COVID-19, on May 25th, 2020, we witnessed the killing of an unarmed Black man, George Floyd. The middle of this mural in Minnesota includes names of other Black Americans like Breonna Taylor who have been killed by police. Blacks in the US make up about 13% of the US population, but they account for 36% of the unarmed persons shot by police between 2015 and 2019. And today, across the US, we see social justice movements calling for an end to these inequities and all the others that Kim, Susan, Dan have mentioned. Susan mentioned that for every $100 of wealth, white wealth, Black wealth is $10. In an article that Cross et al. Did on the misperception of racial economic inequality, they found that even though Black wealth had not changed since the 60s, the perception of Black wealth was that it was 80% that of white wealth. So rather than the actual value of $10, people thought Black wealth or think Black wealth is $80. And they argue that one needs to address structural changes because we have this odd perception of those inequities. Next slide. Many professional organizations, AESP included, have issued statements on addressing inequities. The Code of Ethics of the American Society of Civil Engineers says that we must treat all persons equally, that we must consider diversity of the community and shall endeavor in good faith to include diverse perspectives. I've had the honor of working recently with Dr. Yvette Pearson, one of the AESP 2020 keynote speakers that Dan discussed. And she made it clear that we need to support a Jedi culture. So yes, we need diversity. Yes, we need inclusion to make sure that there's meaningful participation in everything. We need equity to ensure that people have the resources so that they can be present and participate meaningfully. But we need justice to break down the structures and barriers that harm and limit who is present and who meaningfully participates. And this semester, my students and I, we are exploring how built infrastructure, as a part of our Envision Sustainable Communities course, how that built infrastructure perpetuates some of the inequities that we see. The course revolves around the Envision Credential and Certification Program, which is currently endorsed by ASCE. Next slide. And 2 weeks ago, Mr. Josh Frank, an urban designer in Tampa, presented on a highway project and his vision to transform it into Boulevard. We had been reading about environmental justice, watching videos by Dr. Robert Bullard, who's seen as a father of environmental justice. And Josh presented these slides showing our 275 and I-4 that had pretty much helped to disrupt Black communities in Tampa. And my time is up, but I'll just take one more minute if I can. And students learned that one of the most productive parts of Tampa, Central Avenue, the business part of the Black community, was one of the areas destroyed when the highways came through. Next slide. As we go through the Envision course, students are really asking questions about our field. Some of graduate students had never heard of the way in which our infrastructure has impacted certain communities. We've been able to bring speakers in and we're asking questions to think of what our future looks like. Over the summer, our Strong Coast program partnered with the Bloom Center at Berkeley and with the University of Arizona's Indigifuse program to host a workshop on co-creating knowledge on food, energy, and water systems with Indigenous populations. And I'll leave with this quote from Dr. Begay, who says that, you know, everything is a living system, and it's a living system of interrelationships with man as an integral part of the whole. And I speak about Black folks in this presentation, but really and truly, it's Black and Brown folks, and in particular, Indigenous folks in the US, and their access to food, energy, water at this time have been really just as horrible and horrific as the experiences that we've seen in inequities in Black communities. And I think it's a time for our field to really look at this idea of Jedi culture and how do we learn from others, because in some cultures, the way we do science does not even resonate with the way in which they think of things like water. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maya. That was an excellent kind of summary of kind of what we've been dealing with in this country, and how we specifically need to think about moving forward to reduce some of those institutional barriers, inequities in our built infrastructure. So our final speaker today is Mark Edwards. He's a professor at Virginia Tech, and he will be talking to us about how some of his longtime work in water can be applied to environmental justice in the current COVID pandemic. So without further ado, take it away, Mark.
Well, thank you, Kim, and I just appreciate this opportunity to provide some perspectives on engineering ethics and citizen science in underserved communities. And these are based on experiences of the Virginia Tech U.S. Water Study team over the last 15 years, both pre and now post-COVID. And when we started on this journey about 15 years ago, I realized there were some mega trends that we needed to address. Next slide. And across society, that included the fact that in the US, water is not a human right. You get the water that you can afford. That we were starting to live in a post-truth world, and we're observing declining public trust and all across the world. And in the US, we had out of control debt and shrinking cities and towns. And within academia and even AESP, we have a climate change, of hyper competition and perverse incentives and an oversupply of PhDs for jobs. And we also have a top-down grand challenge funding model, which is good for solving grand challenges, but not so good for solving day-to-day problems, practical problems that our communities are facing. And now post-COVID, if you can advance, we're continuing to see increasing or declining public trust and just spiraling out of control debt, which places communities and towns in impossible financial situations. One element of what we do is training. Next slide. And so students in our program who choose to do this as a hobby, they take a class in engineering ethics in the public, which was originally co-designed by myself and Dr. Yana Lombrinidou. We are continually engaged in case studies in vulnerable communities and dealing with crazy unfolding ethical dilemmas that just boggle the mind. And on this journey, we engage in a lot of personal reflection and introspecting as to what our role is exactly in society as scientists, engineers. And for students involved in this, they do a lot of thought about public storytelling and documentaries. And if you want to see examples of that recently from our group, I'd be happy to provide you with links. Next slide. Practically, our work in communities has been relevant. We exposed environmental crimes occurring in Flint, Michigan, which resulted in a federal emergency declaration and elevated the profile of citizen science, both for Flint resident Leanne Walters and others, but across society as a whole. And to date, Flint itself has received more than $1 billion of relief. And we've also had very high profile successes in many other communities, just as a couple examples. Next, St. Joe, Louisiana, where Adrienne Kantner worked, and we worked with her to expose a lead problem there, which resulted in declaration of a public health emergency and mobilization of millions of dollars in relief. And next, recently we exposed a problem with illegal pesticide dosing to the water of Denmark, South Carolina, because they couldn't afford to do the cheapest legal alternative to controlling their problems. And next, and there's been many, many other successes, but for every success, there's 95% of the communities we work with, we simply expose that they have really bad and expensive water, and nothing illegal is actually happening. Next slide. So with that, post-COVID, what we're realizing is the future is unfortunately very much in need of this kind of work, because Flint, Denmark, St. Joe were ahead of the curve in terms of going bankrupt, and their past is the future of many of our cities and towns. And many of us are following in the footsteps of result of COVID and financial and emotional stress. And so we're going to continue applying our bottom-up science model that seeks and speaks truth, that usually in communities only finds that they have very expensive and crappy water, but every now and then we do expose some unethical or criminal behavior, and that's very, very disconcerting. We judge our success by, first, the quality of the science that we do. Secondly, the problems that we've solved and exposed in these communities underserved by science. We've calculated that our work has directly or indirectly led to over $5 billion of relief to date to these communities. And it's put a spotlight on infrastructure inequality, engineering ethics, and it's given us all a sense of purpose, which is useful in today's world, and both for us and our citizen science collaborators. So with that, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you to all of our panelists. I think this was an excellent, excellent panel today. And our next step is to just open it up for questions and discussions. I'd like all of our panelists to mute, but share your video so that we can, get you all on screen and start our discussion. So I wanted to start with just a question to all of you, and you can take it out one by one, or if someone else has already said your answer, you don't have to, but I encourage you all to try to answer this. And just related to the theme of the theme of convergence and what you've heard, I would like you to address how can we make our research and our teaching more convergent. Convergence is a big deal right now, and related to what you're doing, how can you make your activities a lot more convergent?
I'll start off here. I'd say one of the big things, get out of your building and go find somebody on campus who is thinking about something that's important to you and is important to them, but you're not in the same field. And for me, that meant going over to our School of Social Work and talking to people who studied public health, because they had ideas and perspectives. We were thinking about indoor environmental quality as something we wanted to focus on, and their perspectives were eye-opening to me. We had the same end goal, but totally different approaches of trying to get there. And so I think stop just talking to engineers. Environmental engineering is a great big tent community, but even with that, I think we can do better to get across campus.
Yes, can I add to that? I absolutely agree. I think in interviewing the 32 faculty members across 6 institutions, we did not just do environmental engineers, it was biology, it was nursing. And they had really, we really share common experiences. And even in the delivery of education, there are tips that we can learn from other fields and experiences that we can share. So yes, that interdisciplinary, not staying in our own area, but talking. I think these conferences like this, are very important.
Other panelists, do you want to jump in?
I can jump in and say that if we look at the communities around our universities, especially for those of us in urban centers that are very diverse and challenged, and we team up with people who have experience working there, and we go and we listen and we learn. I mean, the types of challenges people have require all hands on deck. And I think we have to start approaching our work differently and giving our students and ourselves opportunities to engage meaningfully with people to solve, which are very wicked problems. But we have to do it with communities as partners. We have to do it with other colleagues, businesses, everyone sort of as partners. And COVID-19 has really showed, I mean, we are all struggling within our own universities, within our own cities, to merely survive right now.
Thank you. Susan, were you trying to jump in?
The other thing I was just going to say was reach out broadly, like Maya said, within the community, but also outside the US. Listen to the experiences, especially of our international students, and where are they coming from and what are they experiencing, and learn from them. Because I think we tend to think that it's a one-way, often it's a one-way street, but it's not. We can learn as much from them in terms of experiencing and what they bring, and how do we work together, as has been said, to make this a more just, more equitable, and a more sustainable world.
All right, Mark, did you?
Well, just in the words of a great anthropologist, Margaret Mead, who studied science in the 50s, she said to always remember that you are a part of society and that you should not set yourself apart from society.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I would like to ask one more question to the panel before we open it up. I know a lot of you all have experience in trying to make sure you're teaching and doing everything in an equitable way. That's what a lot of you spoke about today. So I would ask everyone to just think of two things. One, what you would consider the absolute best practice, what you think just hit the ball out of the park, this tends to work, is what most of us should be trying to do if we can. And then also something that you think won't work, something you've tried and you thought it was a great idea, but it just fell flat and just didn't work. So I'd like you to just, those two things, if you could.
I could jump in. I'm not sure if I'll answer both questions, Kim, but I think something that I find works is potentially asking students to provide context, some sort of cultural or geographical context that's relevant to their experience, and then sort of do some work to look at how, so I would do some work to look at how to bring that into the narrative that I give in the class, into the problem, into the question or something like that. And to be really cognizant of people's access to resources and the type of language that one might use in describing one's access to resources, and also just being really grateful to have diverse perspectives present.
And I can add to that. I'm also a chair of a department, and it's 3 programs. You know, it's construction management, it's geomatics, and it's environmental engineering. And I've sort of tried to really think about not just doing the interviews with different faculty members, but also look over the spring and the summer and now the fall for what faculty are really successful in connecting with their students, and in the challenging environment, really getting them to interact on that online environment. And what I find it's really, and even the faculty that answered our surveys, I found that they were the more empathetic kind of understanding faculty, the ones who could really communicate with their students and really cared about their students. And I also find the ones that are very successful in getting their students to attend their online and really learn and really ask those questions are the faculty that listen. They start out their online classes with a, how are you doing? Do you have everything you need? Write me separately. If you need something, I'll try and get those resources to you. So that learning, that continued learning, that understanding across race, it really has to do with the personality of individuals and do they really care and are they really listening? And I think when you do that, so much more can be accomplished in your research, in your learning environment, even the challenging learning environment.
Thank you. I'll also remind the panelists, if you're not speaking, please remember to mute your mic so you don't get background noise. All right, anyone else want to jump in?
So I might have a little bit of background noise here, so I'll talk a little bit louder here because it's recess in my house right now. But the thing I would say is, never waste a good crisis. What are the things that we've been forced to do that are working well? And with the online teaching, the opportunity to answer a question by typing it in the chat, I've had students answering my questions who would not have raised their hand in a class and answered them. Or a group exercise where we say, okay, does anybody have the right answer, have an answer they want to share? They can chat it just to me. That student who doesn't want to say in front of the whole class the answer because they're afraid they're wrong. We have some new tools available to us that are working in ways I hadn't appreciated how valuable they were going to be. Something that hasn't worked well, so I'll open to my colleagues, in-class demonstrations. I love to take a pH meter, a DO probe to class and do something. It's not translating as well as I would want it to. So there are, I'm sure my colleagues out here, as well as the ones online, have done some things that are working really well. So I'd love to get some of those best practices.
Thank you. All right, go ahead, Susan. Are you raising your hand?
So it's this will somewhat answer Sid's question too in the Q&A about my comment about participation and focusing on mental health. So back in spring when we switched and I was still associate chair, the first participation question that I asked, which was kind of changing the format from in-class activities and minute papers, was just what can I do to help you as your instructor and as associate chair? Well, I was surprised how many students responded. Some responded nothing, some responded with, I'm concerned about my family back in Colombia. I'm concerned about this. And that started kind of a path that I've continued since March on these participation questions. They're often just reflective. I don't play psychiatrist, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I try and get them to think through. I try and get them to think about some of their successes. I try and, okay, you've got a challenge. What were your challenges? What were your successes? I try and get them, what made you laugh this week? What made you, what made you smile? And I share my challenges. And what I found was that it opened up communication with students I probably wouldn't have communicated with otherwise, because in a class of 60, they're not all 70 students, they're not all going to communicate with me. I give them the option that they don't have to answer. They can just tell me their favorite color or whatever. But it's been really interesting to see this. I've learned about, I've got a student in Mongolia. One of the photos is a student in Mongolia sampling water. And I've learned about her. I know her dog's name. So I think those have been connections that wouldn't have happened otherwise. It helps me feel connected to them, and I think it helps them feel connected to me and also to the university. And when I've seen students really struggling, then it gives me an opportunity to suggest that they go to the counseling services, and I can give them, information about that. So in my mind, that's been something I didn't anticipate. Kind of like what Dan said also with Zoom. The polling is also another great way of getting students to be able to answer questions in a non-threatening way because it's all anonymous. so they can answer questions, and it's a great way to get in almost instant feedback on what they understand. So using these tools, I think, are great opportunities that we didn't have before.
Thank you. Those are great. I want to kind of switch gears to some of our questions we have. I know some of you submitted questions earlier, and some of you are submitting questions in real time. So I will read one out from the synchronous question, and I'll ask Colleen. I think Colleen has the ones that were submitted ahead of time. I'll ask her to pose a few of those to the panel. But I see one that from Jean McCrae saying, how do you manage relationships with the people and communities you're working with? So given that we're tied to an academic calendar and a timeline of these kinds of problems and challenges, with students being responsible, but not over the entire project. So this whole idea of continuity and kind of tying. And I like this question also because there's certain realities of our jobs, our academic jobs, that sometimes may pose a challenge when we're trying to really engage with communities. So I'd like any of you who would like to jump in on that.
I could start. I would say that we're lucky to work with anthropologists quite a bit. And one thing I've learned from them is that they, or at least the colleagues I work with, is that they sort of spend a long time and a lot of time with communities. So my colleague, Dr. Zargar, who's a co-PI on the Strong Coast grant, has been working in Belize for over 20 plus years. And I think your relationship evolves. And as a faculty member, what you could do is you keep evolving with the community and with your research, and you bring in other people, and you don't leave. And so whether we're in Belize or here in Tampa, it's not, you know, we're not coming in and leaving. Right now, it is a little challenging to sort of be engaged everywhere. I have projects in Barbados, in Belize, and in Tampa Bay. And the past few months have not really, I've personally not been able to engage in all of those places, but it's not that I won't in the future. And so I do think we need to think about long-term commitment. This is probably easier if you have places you work with close to your university. Because there's a cost, of course, for international work or for work across in another state. And so when you're close to your university, you know, I think you can establish those long-term relationships. We are a community engaged university. And so since 2006, we've had that mindset as an R1 university. So to answer Jean's question, I think look at this as probably a long-term thing. And it may be that you're engaged somewhere and it's just not going to work out and you can walk away because there's so many challenges. There are politics, all sorts of different things involved. And at some point, if you need to walk away, you walk away.
Thank you. I'll ask Colleen unless someone else wants to. I'll ask Colleen and maybe ask some of the questions that were submitted prior to this.
Okay. We have a question from Juliana. She says, what are some steps we as scholars, more specifically scientists and engineers, can take to become proactive against systemic biases in our communities and workplace?
I don't want to hog the conversation, but I've had, I think for many people of color who are in academia right now, for faculty, since May, we have probably been meeting with other Black faculty, staff, and students across our institutions, with upper administration, and then we've been meeting with each other across the country. And so I could think of across the country, there is Dr. Monica Cox from Purdue, Charlotta Berry, and some other faculty who've put together a website and a movement more or less called blackinengineering.org. and they have a call to action that literally lays out things that academic departments and universities can do to address systemic biases within academia. So I think resources are out there. And also, you know, forum groups. So I know at USF, we've had a steering committee that's been meeting every week since June. And we've started a series, an enlightenment series that some of the faculty have put together. It's not a recorded session, and it's sort of closed to USF, but faculty, staff, and students, faculty, staff mainly can attend. And it's an opportunity to sort of learn from each other and learn from the experts in this field who are all, you know, in our own universities, and sort of to be open and honest and really treat this time as a time to learn. And if you don't have faculty of color in your institution, we are on Twitter, so reach out.
Thank you, Maya.
I can
Anyone
add
else?
that. Yes, I'd like to add to that. I think, you know, the experiences and how we think about some of these things are really going to be very different where we teach. You know, I've changed universities, and it's the profile is very different now. I'm now at an HBCU. I'm at the largest public HBCU in the country. And I think the experiences and how you talk about some of these things are very different. I was University of Arkansas Medical Sciences before. So we have to, the only way to get through some of this is to understand what's going on. Only through forums and talking, like Maya said, we have to communicate. And I'm still learning. I am Black, and I'm still learning every time I talk to someone at every different institution. And so creating those spaces and those groups and all of this getting together is really important. And every time you learn something, and the context will be different everywhere you go. I just want to, you know, share that it's really different at every different institution.
All right. Anyone else? I just want to just take a minute. I'm not a panelist, I'm the moderator, but I'll just throw in a little bit here, and just to say that I do think part of the question was they specifically mentioned systemic biases in our communities and workplace. And I think in academia, which is all of us on a panel, is our workplace, we do need to be very aware of some of the systemic biases that are occurring. Just this morning, I had a meeting with someone in industry, and they were telling me about some of the bias training they had, and they've had to step back on some of that. But I want to ask you, the panel, to just, if you're comfortable just talking about this idea of inherent bias in academia, because it does exist. I was visiting another university not too long ago, and I had a long conversation with a Black female faculty member there, who just told me just a really heartbreaking experience just about some of the bias that she had encountered just from students, mainly at the university, and how it was really weighing on her and affecting how she was able to do her job. So I want you to just address some of kind of the systemic bias or inherent bias in academia. What have been, you know, what are your experiences? And can you talk about if your universities are doing some, you know, really neat things around that? I would love to hear about it.
Well, I'll go first here on this. You know, I would say, you know, one of the first things with this is admitting that you have a problem. And I think all of us, you know, this has been a year for people who didn't realize there was a problem to admit that there is one. And now we have to take that next step and do something about it. And I would say, you know, most of our universities are fairly progressive places, and we want to do the right things. The other thing that I would say, and this is just a reflection on where I am at my university, we're also full of really, really busy people, and we need our leadership to structure our commitments so that we can put the time where we're supposed to. You know, we have some great programs throughout the year. The one in the spring, Day of Dialogue, which I've attended, and I've heard good stories, learned lessons and best practices, but it's totally optional. Our dean will give us the day off from teaching for that day to participate. But I think all of us need to look to our leadership to say, if this is where our priorities are, we're going to free up the time from your teaching and research because we want you to do this. And so we've got great programs, but you can think about all the great talks on your campuses and programs that you don't participate in. This is one that we should all be participating in. I think we need to look to our leadership to make it possible for us to do that, and maybe even require us to, and I think we would do it.
Thank you, Dan.
I
All right, go ahead.
add, Kim, that, it's this executive order that the president released, I think, in mid-September, banning some of the diversity and inclusion training that's happening at federal agencies. We've seen some universities sort of saying that we are going to, we're committed to diversity and inclusion, but we are going to, review how we do that at our institution because of this fear that, federal grant money is going to be withheld. And when you read the language that was placed in that executive order, and the types of things that they're talking about, of what people are speaking about when you're going to these trainings, are so far from the truth that I think in the types of things that the diversity inclusion offices really do. And it's unfortunate that our professional organizations, our universities have not screamed out loud that this should not happen. I tweeted about it, and somebody mentioned, universities file a lawsuit when there was a ban on international students. Where is that cry right now for this training that impacts how women function in academia, how minorities, how all differently able, all sorts of people function in academia? Where is that outcry? And so what you're seeing is the persons who have been studying this, doing this as part of their research, being threatened by this right now, also thinking whether funding is going to disappear. I would say that, at USF, we put up $500,000 for research on Blackness and anti-Black racism, and awarded 23 proposals that had to have some community engagement component to do the research, to look at systemic biases. And it's there was so much excitement when that was released, and those were funded on September 1st. And now it's a statement from the president that we are committed to diversity and inclusion, but we are also, reviewing the work that we do. So it's sort of this lukewarm response, and it's why aren't we all up in arms? Where are the female faculty who also have benefited from this work and have in our discipline, we are at 50% women in terms of undergrad, grad students, and close to assistant professors. So where's that cry?
Excellent point. Anyone else want to? All right, so I will pose. We time check. I think we have about 15 minutes left, and this is an interesting conversation. So I do want to get some other questions from. I will ask one in a chat, and then I'll ask Colleen to queue one up from the previously submitted ones. So there's a question in the chat from Andrea Ferro about how do you, I'm going to paraphrase because it's a long question, but basically, how do you engage meaningfully with communities as full partners, particularly when you may be an assistant professor, right? And how do you do that when the risk to your career may be great? So how do you fix what they're calling the perverse incentives in academia?
Mark, do you want to go? Or I should say that, we there should be an article coming out sometime soon, I hope, in Environmental Engineering Sciences, and it's based on a workshop that we held at AEESP Conference last year. And the co-authors, it's really led by Lupita Montoya from the University of Colorado Boulder. But it looks at, you know, we had about 60 attendees, and many were assistant professors or postdocs. And it was this question of what, you know, sort of what does your ideal, what do you want to do in academia? And it speaks a lot to community engaged work. And so I think for assistant professors and for our students, there's lots of interest in this. And it's something that the tenure process needs to think of how you quantify, how you value that, because it's not going to produce the same number of papers and so on per year, because community work takes time to build those relationships. And many times, sometimes you even the publications think that, oh, that's not real science, right? That doing that kind of work is sort of labeled as activism in some cases, and that's we shouldn't be doing that. But I think that COVID-19, all the social justice movements have really upended all of that. And hopefully the funding agencies commit to supporting faculty to do this work, and hopefully the assistant professors get that funding.
Absolutely not. I agree. And I also want to hear from those who served as chairs or leaders, and how you, or even AP, you know, promotion and tenure committees. What are the is there a change in the conversations? And this is something that we mentioned in the Grand Challenges report too. It's important for us to start to prioritize collaborative research, interdisciplinary research, and now we will add serious engagement with communities. You know, we have to think of how we prioritize that, the message we give to our early career faculty, what that looks like, because if we don't send a clear message that we value that kind of work, our early career faculty members will not, it won't be in their best interest to do it. And I know some of my colleagues have even said, they've told the junior faculty, don't get involved in a lot of interdisciplinary work, a lot of community level work till you get tenure. And the truth is, you start to lay the groundwork for your career while you're going for tenure, you know? And so if it's, you know, it's something that I personally think we should be encouraging a lot earlier, but it won't make sense unless the promotion tenure committees and the chairs and the deans and everyone else, unless we value that. So I would like to hear about some of the conversations you're having at your universities around this, if any.
I can, you know, try to answer some of that as a chair, because it's challenging. It really is challenging, because at the same time, I love community work. Maya does it, and I did a lot of that in my early start, and I did get criticized for that, to be honest with you. Too much service to the community and working with the community too much, and so it can be damaging. We have to strike a balance. I have seen better recognition of service activities over the years from different institutions, and discussions where they integrate that more into the tenure processes and recognition of that. So that's good news. It's not as bad as it used to be, in my opinion. But as chairs, we have to be very careful. We don't want to ill-advise and then hurt their tenure. And so we have to strike a balance. And you know, what we often do is say, okay, if you're going to do service, be strategic about it. Ensure that you can get good quality publications out of that service work. But like Maya said, it takes a longer time to do this. But in the meantime, what you can do is, you know, until you get some results, you can publish on methodologies in community. I just said this to a faculty the other day. You know, I know that you're not going to get your results for 2 years, but can you in the meantime publish on methodologies, you know, strategies in working with the community, different things like that. So you're not, you know, entirely halted, you're making some progress. And there was also another time I was told back in my days, you concentrate on one thing in your research and that's it. You focus and you don't do anything else. And I disagree. And we're finding that you've got to do that interdisciplinary work. And it's okay to have 2 tracks, you know, kind of your research and your sort of service track that you can also publish on. And grants may come in for one track and not the other track while you wait. It's okay to be an expert in 2 areas then, and one can be sort of that service and one can be your research. But it's an extremely challenging, and it's not just up to chairs, by the way. You got to go all the way up the university level for them to recognize how important service is. But I have seen more where where you submit grants, we call it Ramsey's Hair. Now they've added a component that says, what is your contribution to community work? So there's an understanding that that's also important, and we're beginning to count that a little bit more. But it is a challenging area.
Thank you. And
Mark has been having his mic unmuted.
Oh, has he been talking and wanting to talk? Mark, did you want to jump in?
No, I didn't really want to talk, but
okay, okay.
Well, I think the main thing is you really have to manage expectations as to what your role is in the community, and the partnership is for us at least is a scientific partnership that seeks to answer scientific questions. And I think personally, if you are going to fully partner with a community as an activist or an advocate, that's very dangerous terrain for an academic. And so, the issue is we're partnering on this issue. We have mutual scientific interest. And at the end of the day, the data is what it is. And I understand that some folks, like scientists, are hoping the data will show a certain outcome, and they'll be happy when it does, and they'll be unhappy when it doesn't. But that is the nature of our partnerships with communities. And I do think if the word fully partner implies that perhaps you're thinking about a role as an advocate or activist, and that's completely different than what we do.
Thank you. I did want to get one more question in. We only have 3 minutes though. I'm told we have to end at 1:25 and it's 1:22. So I'll just add, but I do think this is a good question because I think it's from a student. And it says, what can students do in order to get the most out of their lab courses? This student decided to opt out of their lab and take it next semester in hopes that the kinks are worked out because they've heard it's hard to grasp the material via Zoom. And they asked that during Susan's presentation. So Susan, you want to give a quick answer before we have to end?
I'm going to say, and it's true with all courses, engage in the material. If you can, I've had students, the kits are behind me. Use the kits. Try to do, if you've got something like that, think out of the box. Don't just follow exactly what you were told to do step by step. Think about what else can you do with these kits? What else can you do with these tests? Ask questions. And I think that's true across the board. And think of other ways you can just use this information.
Can I add to that quickly? I found that students are very ingenious. Just recently, we have a what you call field study then with companies, and we're not able to get field studies for all our students. But we were quite shocked with some of the students finding these really innovative, engaging videos on some field experiences. And we were able to use that, integrate that with monthly reports, so they were still learning. So there's a lot on the internet, thank goodness. It's really not just up to the student to make that engaging and get the same learning experience. The faculty has to be a part of that too. They have to post things, they have to engage you. Like Susan said, she set the kits, she did it. Not all faculty will do it. Thank God she did it. So it's between the faculty, but also the students. Search online for every kind of video, giving you a bit more experience and learning on that content if you can.
I created for my students, the lab students were so happy being outside, and actually they said that they felt like they were doing something productive and they were on campus. So many of them were on campus. I created a scavenger hunt for my other class with a whole list of water and wastewater infrastructure. And if they're not on, they can do it either online, they can do it in person, they can find similar infrastructure in their area, just to try and find ways to get them engaged in the material. So engage your students, engage in the material, talk to your faculty, talk to your peers, don't be afraid.
Thank you, excellent, excellent. All right, so it is 1:25. I've been told one of my main jobs as moderator is to make sure we end on time so that we respect everyone's time and we can have ample time to kind of talk about what the next couple of weeks will look like. So I will hand this over to our conference organizers to let us know what's on deck for next week.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jones, for all your efforts as moderator, and thank you to all the panelists. It's hard to believe we're here. It's the first session, like we all propose, Maya and I proposed this, and with the moderators and panelists. So thank you for all your efforts and everything that you're doing at your universities and in the community, and for research and for the global community as well. I will share about our next session. I also want to say thank you to our interpreters, closed captionists, and we have a lot of students, Brooklyn, Mistel, and Ashley, that have been helping behind the scenes. Also Heather, our manager of the Strong Coast, that is helping. So there's a lot of effort. I will never view a Zoom webinar the same way, like with all the efforts behind this. So next week we'll have session 2 on fostering informed decisions and actions. You might have seen a lot of these people in the news, especially Lindsay Marr in the aerosols science for COVID-19. And there should be a quiz. You should be linked to it in your browser if you haven't already, if you want to gain the session certificate. And so you need an 80% or higher. We did try to limit the number of questions, and there's also opportunity to provide feedback, rating the session on a scale of 1 to 5, and any comments. We'd really appreciate your feedback. Sorry if we didn't get to your questions. Please continue this conversation on Twitter, hashtag AEESP Converging COVID-19 to keep answering your questions. But thank you for everyone that submitted and that participated. And we, of course, want to acknowledge our sponsors, National Science Foundation, for funding this, and the different universities and organizations. So thank you, and hope to see you next week.
Thank you, everyone.